into the Backroads Bill Podcast. I'm Ben, and last week we talked with Brett Hurtubise, who joined us in studio to talk about his father, Troy, who, of course, his claim to fame was not just for all the inventions he did, but also for being a part of a film called Project Grizzly, which was all about Troy's ambitions to create a bear-proof suit that essentially would survive a bear attack. And the whole film is him trying to create this suit and going out and trying to test it. And today, we are continuing that thread with our guest, as Project Grizzly is just about set this coming Sunday as it celebrates its 30th anniversary. There's a special 30th anniversary showing that's happening. And today's guest is the director of Project Grizzly, Peter Lynch. And Peter is on here to talk about not just who Troy was, his eccentric and very interesting personality, as well as some of just shooting the film, some of his favorite parts of shooting with Troy, some of his favorite memories, and the lasting impact that this film, which is kind of a cult classic, the lasting impact that Project Grizzly has had, to the point where it has a 30th anniversary special showing in Toronto, which we'll talk about later on in this podcast. But first, we do need to thank today's lead sponsor, the North Bay Regional Health Center Foundation.
We often talk about the rhythm of life in North Bay. For Amanda, that rhythm was fast. Hockey practices, baseball games, juggling a full-time career, and keeping up with two energetic boys. But life hit pause after routine surgery led to a call she never expected. Stage 2 breast cancer. No symptoms, no warning. Suddenly, Amanda was facing a double mastectomy, reconstruction, weeks of chemotherapy and radiation treatments, and several additional surgeries. The path ahead was overwhelming. Through every stage, one question stayed with her. How do I keep being mom for my boys? Amanda's care team at the North Bay Regional Health Center made all the difference. They understood how deeply she wanted to hold on to familiar routines, cheering from the stands, being there at bedtime, staying present in the moments that gave her strength. Their compassion kept her connected to the two people who kept her fighting. She stayed present. She stayed grounded. She stayed mom. This holiday season, help ensure patients have access to the exceptional care they need during life's most challenging moments. Your gift helps patients like Amanda stay connected to the people they love while strengthening healthcare for families across our region. Visit nbrhcfoundation.ca or call 705-495-8125 to give.
So last week in the studio, we had in Brett Hurtubise talking about his father, Troy, of course, claim to fame being the film Project Grizzly. And we are so lucky to have in this week into the podcast, the man who really helped make that come together, Peter Lynch. Peter, welcome into the Backroads Bill Podcast.
Thanks, Ben. Great to be here.
Well, you know, Ben, and for all the viewers and listeners, I usually ask a couple of questions of people. Or I say this, you know, we know so much about our entertainment people and people in sports, but when you go to ask the question, and I've done this question most recently, can you name some of the Canadian film directors? Now, you're younger, Peter and I are older and mature, but, you know, people will get stuck at Norman Jewison. They might get to James Cameron in the Titanic. They might get to David Cronenberg or Sarah Polley, but then after that, I don't know. But again, it's a privilege to have Peter on here because he is the director, and I want to use the word really well. He really knew Troy Hurtubise. I wanted to use the word intimately there, but we're having Peter. And we're not just going to talk about Project Grizzly. We're going to talk about to a person who spent a lifetime as a film director, more than, I think, 25 films and documentaries that I could find. And it's a real pleasure to have you on. And Peter, let's get just started. How did you get into the film business?
Well, that's a long, not linear story. But I first started out, I didn't really have a clue how I'd be a filmmaker. Music was kind of my entree. I started staging music events in Toronto in nightclubs that, you know, I'd bring new bands from New York and I'd show video projections. And it was kind of like a dress rehearsal for what was to come. I did anything from, you know, early rap concerts and breakdancing, fashion shows, new experiments and video art. And my mantra was to always pick people that would be my mentors. So my Harvard was working for people and making myself useful to well-established artists and filmmakers. And slowly I built up the confidence to make my own shorts, and it kind of grew from there.
That's all about cutting your teeth, so to speak. And so around about 1995, I had asked you this question because I've done a couple stories through the Village Media chain. You came across Troy Hurtubise, and tell us how that evolved through the National Film Board.
So I was in Spain, in San Sebastian, and there was a producer named Michael Alder who was with the film board. He had just seen a short I did called Arrowhead, and he liked the film, and he said, we were in this hotel called the London Hotel in San Sebastian. We were watching a soccer game, and he's this inscrutable Brit from London. And he basically said, there's this guy, I think you might want to meet him. Like, I think it'd be interesting for you to meet this guy. And he told me about Troy, and he had read his book, White Tape. It's a story about his frustration with getting funds for his suit. So I said, sure, give me a call when I get back to Toronto. So he basically, I read the book, and then I said I'd go up to North Bay to meet him. So I drove up by myself with this high 8 camera, but arcane camera from the era, and started to film him in his backyard. And his brother came out with a weightlifting bar, and he had put the arm on, and he started whacking him on the arm while he started to calmly tell me facts about grizzly bears and the suit and how many pounds per square inch a grizzly attack would be. And so I knew I had a ringer. And so I basically interviewed him for about 3 hours that day. And that became a kind of almost like a screenplay for what was to come. I started to use those stories he told me as a way into his world.
Yeah, and what was your approach to this? Because after, it was nominated for a Genie Award, and you've won Genie Awards for other projects. People saw there, and maybe this is purposeful as a film director. You want to have many kind of takeaways from watching the film, because it's a 72-minute film, and we'll get back to all the things that happened during the film. But how did you approach, after the 3 hours and a bit more time with Troy? How did you think this was going to turn out? What was your approach?
Well, I didn't know how it was going to turn out, but I don't think anyone could predict that. But I did approach it like he was a character in almost like a Western, rather than a straight documentary. I didn't want just an accounting of his journalistic account, because some journalists might go, hey, Troy, why do you do this? And he'll tell you something, and that's it. For me, I wanted the whole film to be what it was about. And so I could go deeper into his background, into his father, to meet his mother, to see how he changes as the journey unfolds. So ultimately, it became a story about a man who was obsessed with this encounter with the grizzly bear, and that I wanted to show that degree of obsession and sort of enter that dream, get into the story behind the story, as it were.
Yeah, he's a real character, and as time went on, as you said, a real ringer. Did you think that you had struck kind of a gold mine? Again, the ending of the film, until you went out west and tried to find the grizzly bear, that was kind of like the variable. But up to that point in time, how did you what did you think about the character? What did you think about Troy?
I had to get into his mindset. There's a saying that if you want to make a great film, you have to be almost as crazy as your subject. So you can't put yourself above your subject. I wanted to get inside Troy. So yes, he could be, at first, you take everything he says for face value, and you don't know the complexity of his reasons why he might do something. So at first you might go through all these emotions, disappointment, frustration. At one point, I always go through this process with my editor where they hate the subject, and then you realize, you start to put the person back together again. They're a living, breathing character. They're a real person, but in Troy's case, he's also larger than life. And I wanted to sort of explore that line between fact and fiction, between being real and also his larger than life persona.
Yeah, larger than life, to be sure. And happy anniversary, by the way. It is 30 years, Ben, this coming up this year. And there's going to be a special screening at the Hot Docs Ted Rogers Cinema on January the 25th. And we'll make sure that's part of the podcast and the stories.
Nice.
And the National Film Board, film is easily accessible. And a couple of my favorite scenes are the one where there's a flaming inferno. I guess he had tested the suit in the background, and there's the blowtorch, and here's Troy lighting a cigarette with the blowtorch, and then another one where they're at a derelict kind of drive-in theater, and I don't know how Peter did that. He'll tell us of the RoboCop, and then Troy's kind of in where the film thing, it's decrepit and broken down and decaying. But those are a couple of film clips. But like the blowtorch thing, did you make that happen, or was that just Troy? And of course, the other one I think was staged.
That was serendipity. That was literally like Troy went, I need a smoke. I gotta light my smoke bud. And JP had the blowtorch because he used it to light the fire. So it was but he would never shy away from taking the most dramatic route, like shaving with a Bowie knife. He's not going to use a little Bic shaver. Doesn't look good on film.
And what about the drive-in theater?
The drive-in theater we shot in Muskoka. And then the ruin was up near Sudbury, just on the outskirts of Sudbury. And it was interesting. He wanted to, I think what was really interesting, it was very collaborative with Troy. And he was very much like the way an actor would talk about his motivation. You want me to bring the knives, bud? Should I lose the buckskin? He was very aware of the meaning of objects, the meaning of things, and wanted to participate in storytelling. And so I think, on top of his bare research and the reasons behind his suit, he's a raconteur. He's a guy who likes to spin a yarn. And I think part of that is, on a Friday night, instead of just going to country style and hanging out with your 7 damn good men, like the Knights of the Round Table, you go out to the dump and, you test, you make your own RoboCop, you know what I mean? So I was interested in that sort of sense of between pop culture and the kind of inspiration he would draw from RoboCop, let's say, in his suit, to like the physical reality, that world between the dream world and the physical reality.
Yeah, another favorite film clip is outside the Davidi Club, Ben, I think it is, and where he's got the bike gang kind of members, and they've got bats and stuff, and they're flailing away at Troy, like until they're exhausted almost. And was that kind of staged as well, or?
Well, only in the sense. They didn't come across him and just beat him up, but there was a tacit understanding that they were going to give him the full force of their baseball bats, and they kind of, at first they were almost hesitant, and he's going, "No, give me what you got, bud."
I'm sure. Ben.
One of the things that I found really kind of interesting, so obviously we got the chance to talk to his son, and we really got into a little bit of the psyche of who Troy was, and it's such a fascinating story to find out the highs and lows that came with him. One of the things that was interesting is he had some issues with the film after it was released, and we talked about that with Brett. And I guess I wanted your take on, did that come as a surprise to you, or how did, like, after it comes out and then he's saying some of these things about like looking for some of the grizzly bears, some of the humorous tones to it. How did you kind of react to that?
For me, I take it with a grain of salt, no disrespect. It's in the sense that there's a couple of angles to it. One is that you've got people that are egging him on, going, "Hey, Troy, aren't they laughing at you?" Like kind of thing. And so he felt like he had to say something to, take some kind of umbrage. But the reality is he's just as involved in the staging of, like, obviously testing his suit with a log is not going to be it's not without its humorous side, right? Its absurdist side. So, you have to, I think in some cases he's being manipulated by people who are going, trying to make him think that he has to say something. But in reality, he's very involved in the story. And if I were to just say, present it as direct, serious science, it would be worse than, like, this film is made with love and with great humanity. It's not something making fun of him. But obviously he knew that he's doing things that are also for dramatic effect because he's a storyteller,
Yeah, well, I think another thing in a previous question to Peter, that Troy, after the film, that he was disappointed, but again, like a child perhaps, because he did have mental challenges, but like a child, he was almost pouting because they did not encounter the grizzly bear, which was the point of his whole life to test the suit. There was a test in a cage that was staged and that didn't work out. The black bears at the dump, all the bears ran away. So all these other things, whether it's baseball bats or infernos and the like, he really never did get a chance, Peter, to test it with the grizzly bear.
For me, like it's a mysterious journey that happens when you make a film. And there's at one point where you could see Troy, the mountain men that were our guides, and my crew had a kind of a bloodlust to want to, let's get this on, like let's get this party
WWE
started.
stuff.
Yeah. How much red tape though, like legally, do you have to go through when you think about you're putting yourself in harm's way? Is there any?
Yeah.
How does that work?
Let's just say, when I saw the first log bang, and then he goes, let's do it again, bud. And like I was going, I didn't know whether he would die right there. And I did have concerns about that. I'm sure that like I was given a lot of leeway as a director to be out there. It's like, like you're a kid and you're playing outside and you're imagining you're playing cowboys and, indigenous worlds between, like it's a bit of a game because you have to make something where you're telling a story and you're trying to show as many angles of the story as possible. But for me, the story really came together. We were in the Rockies. He'd run out of coffee and cream. He'd run out of his brand of cigarettes. The mountain men were calling him kind of king of the dumps from, North Bay. Like he had in his mind, these guys were like Jeremiah Johnson, that he would have a meeting of the minds. But these guys were wearing, beaten up Adidas and bashed up baseball hats and were these cynical Albertan hunters, So you have this clash of realities of a dream and this impossible dream that's very quixotic, and then you have the reality of nature closing in, right? So when we were in this clearing where he tells the story of where he met the old man, it was very much, to me, this was the real part of the movie in the sense that he was there dressed in his buckskin, he had his knives, he was there with his men, and he was living life lit large. Like it was where his dream and imagination were living in that clearing, in that snow, where he could tell that story. And even my most cynical crew member who wanted to just film this encounter, and even the guys, the snickering mountain men, when he told that story, you could hear a pin drop. And we were shooting on film, so there's 10-minute reels. And when the first reel ran out, everyone goes, get the reel, get the next reel. It's like people knew it was gold. They knew we were back on the quest. We're back on the dream. And to me, that's what it's really about, right? Everything else is, there's some truth to everything. But that's, to me, was where I found the core of the film.
It's almost that time of year. Early mornings at the rink, fresh notebooks and backpacks, and a community gearing up for another great season of varsity sports. At Source for Sports North Bay, we're proud to be part of it all. Whether it's finding your kid's first pair of skates, gearing up for tryouts, or outfitting your team for the season ahead, we've got you covered. Because here, we're not just a sports store, we're neighbors, coaches, teammates, and fans. And we're proud to cheer you on every shift, step, and stride of the way. Visit Source for Sports North Bay at 1321 Fisher Street and let us help you along your way. It's funny that you talk about shooting on film, right? Because this was back in 1996 at release. So
Correct. Yeah.
You were shooting it like in the mid-90s. Speaking of film, somebody who uses film a lot is Tarantino, and I thought it was really interesting how Quentin Tarantino has there's a quote on the bottom of the poster for him. Did you ever talk to him before, or do you know anything about that quote, or did they?
So what happened was the film showed at a theater that he goes to in LA, and he saw the film, and then this was the autumn of '96, and that year he was on the Charlie Rose. The end of the year, there was a movie roundup, and I was like visiting the family in Napanee, Ontario, and a friend calls from New York, Peter, Tarantino's giving your film, Project Grizzly, a shout out. He's on Charlie Rose of the New York Times, and so he was on Charlie Rose with these other critics from the New York Times and very influential film critics. And they were asked what their favorite films were that year. And what the first thing he said is, have you seen Project Grizzly? It's like gigantoid. It's this guy builds, he tells it. It was fantastic.
It's so up his alley, right? And I think this was before Pulp Fiction. Like this was Reservoir Dogs era for him. So
I think this one, he might have, I can't remember. I think it's Pulp Fiction and Reservoir Dogs had come out, but I remember seeing Jackie Brown, and which I like, and there was timelines like 4:00 and like this. I'm convinced he was influenced. Like that cut was had watched Project Grizzly, the way he was doing the timelines.
As soon as that, like I saw his name, I'm like, this is absolutely up his alley because it's humorous, but also like the concept is so unique and strange that it's like it's hard to forget it.
Yeah. And the language is colorful.
Very colorful. Now, of course, after 1996 and the NFB and Troy goes on to so many things, so many inventions, so many creations, from the fire paste to the Kevlar armor for soldiers, to the bear spray was earlier. So many things. The hockey equipment. Now, did you stay in touch with him? And then fast forward to when he tragically died in the car wreck. What did you think after that? But did you keep in touch with him? And was he the most bizarre character that you've ever come across?
That's like 5 questions.
I know,
Bill.
There's too many.
Well, I'll try to unpack some of those. So, like, I started to root my understanding of him as an classic Canadian idiosyncratic inventor. Ball and string inspiration. And if a lot of inventors, they're outsiders and they don't always think in a straight line, or they think outside the box. So their ideas are sometimes fantastical, and the ideas are often ahead of the actual technology, So I feel he's something about him is a classic inventor, and that's why he kept on doing it. His instinct was to keep inventing, right? So I admire him on that level, and I tried to identify with him on that level. Where I kept in touch with him was that whenever we would show the video, and there'd be a screen, like there was one up in North Bay at Film Festival up there, and he brought out that one of the early iterations of the Halo, and I was like, whoa, and he was like already taking it to another level, but there's still something in the spirit of the DNA of Project Grizzly that we made that was in all of his other inventions, but just that, he made it slicker or, more tech, more high tech, but the spirit of it, the idea behind it, I could always recognize something of it. And so, yeah, we kept in touch was mostly in when we would screen it. But I've kept in touch with his son, Brett, and his brothers from time to time, his brother. So, it's been more, in the last sort of years, mostly through social media.
Yeah, we've had Chris Darton on. He's an Indigenous filmmaker, and he made a horror film. It's got some Northern Ontario connections to it. But I'm coming to appreciate, I'm as naive as some other people, not knowing about film directors. But you're kind of like behavior therapists in the way you really have to know people, because you've got these characters and you try to make them come to life. Troy was a singular one with his entourage around them. But let's go into some of the other things you've done. And I'm really intrigued with the film The Herd and how you did that, because that occurred reality-wise in the 1930s, where this 62-year-old fellow wanted to drive some reindeer from Alaska to the Northwest Territories. The Canadian government, I think, had purchased the herd, and they were going to try to create a job opportunity for the people of the day up there. And how did you go about doing that herd production? Because it was shot then, and there was probably lots of black and white stuff, but you brought it into contemporary times.
So we did a lot of research, and both for archival, but also identifying narrative stories that were in newspaper clippings, government files, because ostensibly the Canadian government purchased this herd of 3,000 reindeer from Kotzebue Sound, Alaska, and a 62-year-old Sami guy named Andrew Barr came out of retirement and drove this reindeer from there all the way to the Northwest Territories. But what was supposed to take 2 months, like half a year, took nearly 6 years. So what I did is I went to all of the main locations, but I had the advantage of helicopters, planes, snowmobiles, skidoos, so I could speed up the journey, But I went to the Northwest Territories, I went to the Yukon, and I went to Alaska. And I had local people play characters, like put them in backgrounds. And I worked with reindeer herders. And so I shot the present, but made it look like you couldn't tell if it was the past or the present. And then eventually I shot actors. So I had some very high profile actors like Colm Feore and Mark McKinney and Don McKellar. And they played, Don played one of the interdepartmental reindeer subcommittee members, which sounds like a Monty Python skit, but it's a Canadian government. Any northern guy I know could get a laugh out of that, I'm sure. But and then there was an Alaskan entrepreneur who was the original herd that the government bought it from, or there was a Danish botanist. So I had these actors play these guys, using it as a narrative device to jump in and out of the story because it was from 29 to 35. So, that was probably my biggest project. And I would describe it as a kind of a docudrama, but it's all based on true events.
Yes. And you had more money to work with as compared to, say, Project Grizzly.
Yeah, it was probably twice the budget. And it was partly, we also shot it was the last film that the film board actually shot on film and feature length. And it was probably one of the last docudramas that they made. But I wove in archival material, but I spent a great deal of time kind of making it mesh with the real characters. And sometimes I even shot the present day actors and insinuated them into the piece. So it's a big production.
You were just talking about film, like being your last one you shot on film. What was the, for you, because everybody has a bit of a different experience when you transition from an analog digital format. What was it like for you to go from film to now digital? What were some of the things that you loved about it and some of the things that you maybe still don't like about it that you kind of wish film was still as prominent?
Well, initially it had an indefinite depth of field. Like you had to, like in post, blur the back, like bring old school photography techniques to the medium to make it look like cinema, like film. So that was, and then what I liked is that you could film, 20 minutes in one, or longer. So you didn't have to keep changing reels. So, which is good and bad. I mean, your discipline goes out the window because you go, I can just keep rolling, right? But you get also spontaneous stuff because you can afford to keep rolling, and you get the stuff that surprises. At first, too, I found, like, let's say you're shooting the sky, the technology would couldn't hold it, it would blow out. The emulsion of film was a way analog space could sort of capture a feeling of the depth of clouds and shadow and so on. Now it's become better. Now you can sort of film out your window at night and the camera sees ostensibly what your eye sees. And what I really learned was it's the glass that's, like when we watch these big giant films from this Hollywood, they're spending more on lenses than we spend on our entire film.
As somebody's looked at lenses, yes. Yeah. You'll buy like a body, the body of a camera, and this, Bill, for photography. It'll be like $3,000, and then you look at like 3 lenses for them, and they're like $10,000.
Exactly.
Oh yeah, no, it's all about, as Peter said, the glass. But Peter, let's fast forward to 2018 in Birdland, and you've had great diversity in your career, and we'll ask you about your next project or what you're working on. But the storyline, Ben, is here's a ex-cop, Sheila, who installs cameras in her ex-husband's home and girlfriend, and they get murdered, and we won't go into what happens next. But you co-wrote that. How did that come about, that inspiration?
So there's a writer from Swift Current, Saskatchewan, named Lee Gowan. He's a novelist. And he and I just became friends. And we wrote a short story, like about 12 pages, and it was called Blackbird at the time. It's a name that's oversubscribed in movies, so I switched it to Birdland, which I think worked out well. And he and I wrote a script about 10 years earlier, and he lost one of his parents, and it became too distracting for him. So I put it away for a while, and then I revisited it a number of years back and just rewrote it and decided to make it as a dramatic feature film. And it was very challenging to work with fairly low budgets. But I had some very good actors, and like Kathleen Monroe, who started to blow up, and Kara G, and so Stephen McCaddy. And it's a very dark film. And I think you suffer when you go outside your genres, outside your boundaries. Everybody wants you to make their like you want you to make Project Grizzly or something else. So it was challenging to push boundaries and make something I'm going into a new terrain for myself. So I made a film called Cybermen 2, which was about a lot of surveillance. And this film became a story about people surveilling their daily lives and how that changes your behavior. But it was a really interesting film for me to make because I used Toronto as a character, and Toronto was very much a landscape, a city that I've grown up in. So it has a lot of meaning to me, which buildings and which places I chose to film,
Yeah, and we're going to kind of round up here. And as I said earlier, I've got a 2-part story on Troy Hurtubise. And of course, on January the 25th, I think you're going to be there at Hot Docs at the Ted Rogers Cinema on Bloor Street. I'm going to try to be there, Ben, because I have reason to be in Toronto. But and so as we, 30th anniversary, and as we wind down here, final thoughts to you, Peter, about Troy and Project Grizzly, when because again, all these years have gone by, you look back at your works and the diversity and your passion, and what do you think about now, 30 years later?
I mean, who knew that this would still be, riding again, and that there are kids that discover it, kind of like Led Zeppelin on the web, and take it up to the cottage and watch it like a cult movie. It's kind of humbling. And also affirming that I've made something that's sort of stood the test of time, I guess, if I could say. Where the hell did that time go? That's 30 years. I'm stunned. But like if you said how long, it really feels like about 12 years, in my head. And it's also very moving and sad to know that what happened, how Troy's life ended, and I'm very I feel that deeply for his family and his friends, and me. I was gutted to learn what happened. So it's an untimely way to end his part of his journey, but he lives in his work, and I think in a mythic way, his storytelling and his being is somehow exists in Project Grizzly and touches people in another way.
It certainly did touch a lot of people, and I mean, I went down the rabbit hole with Troy and found you, and so glad to have you on the Backroads Bill podcast, and thank you so much.
Oh, thanks, guys. Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Bill.
So a big thank you to Peter for coming on. If you find yourself in the Toronto area this coming Sunday, January the 26th, head on over to the Hot Docs Ted Rogers Cinema for the 6:30 showing. We will have a link in the description if you want to find out more information about this 30th anniversary showing of Project Grizzly. And if you enjoyed this episode and you want more episodes of the Backroads Bill podcast, you can find us on all of your favorite audio platforms, Spotify, Apple. The video version is on the North Bay Echo YouTube channel. And of course, you can follow us on socials underneath the moniker North Bay Echo, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, etc. New episodes of this podcast drop every single Wednesday. You can also check out our website, northbayecho.ca, where you can find this podcast alongside a whole other slew of North Bay and area podcasts, and check out our newsletter, Echo Essentials. So that is it for us this week. Join us again next week for yet another Backroads adventure.